At a crowded train station, a 35-year-old black woman is about to board the most important train ride of her life. Everything is going according to plan until she stops to help an elderly white man struggling with his luggage under the sweltering summer sun. She loses her shot at the National Sprinting Championship, a race she's trained for all year. But what she doesn't know is that the man she helped is the owner of the very high-speed train she missed, and what happens next will change the course of her life forever. Before we dive into this heartfelt story, tell us in the comments, have you ever missed something important to help someone else? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another inspiring story like this one. The heat pressed down on the platforms of Union Station in Washington, D.C., like a heavy quilt no one asked for. It was the kind of day where even the concrete shimmered, the sky a cruel, cloudless blue. The midday sun baked the pavement, and the scent of engine oil, hot metal, and citrus body spray mingled in the air. Summer in the capital was always sticky and slow, but today it felt like the very air was daring people to stop moving. Renee Holloway, 35, wiped a bead of sweat from her brow as she jogged lightly through Gate 7, clutching her racing spikes in one hand and a monogrammed gym bag in the other. She wasn't just catching a train. She was on her way to the National Sprinting Trials in Richmond. Her chance at a title, a sponsorship deal, and maybe, just maybe, a new chapter in her athletic career. She had never made it this far before. For years, she'd juggled part-time coaching jobs, worked the late shift at a juice bar, and saved every spare dollar for race fees, gear, and travel. For months, she had trained after work, rising before dawn to get her miles in before traffic took over the streets, eating chicken breasts and broccoli when all she craved was soul food and peach cobbler. This wasn't a hobby. It was a lifeline. Sprinting wasn't just about winning. It was how she proved, every time her feet hit the track, that she still had control of her future. She checked the overhead board again. Amtrak Acela Express, 2100 to 63 to Richmond. Departure, 12:30 p.m. She still had 11 minutes. It was tight, but she'd made tighter windows before. Her sneakers squeaked across the tile as she navigated the crowds. Around her, travelers darted between vending machines and gates, voices rising over rolling suitcases and train announcements. A child tugged at his mother's purse. A teenager took selfies by a ticket kiosk. The world moved fast, but not as fast as Renee intended to. She moved like a current, eyes locked ahead, calculating her pace with an athlete's precision. But then, just as she cleared the newsstand near Platform 9, she saw him. Just ahead, beside an aging bench scorched by the midday light, an elderly white man in a crisp beige summer suit was struggling with a battered leather suitcase. His face was flushed red, his breathing shallow. One hand gripped a cane, the other clung to the suitcase's handle, which was clearly too heavy for him to lift. The scene slowed her down, as if someone had placed a hand on her shoulder. Passengers swept past like a current around a rock. No one slowed. No one even looked. His knuckles were white from gripping the suitcase. His hat had tipped back slightly, revealing wisps of fine white hair, soaked through with sweat. He looked like a man who had once been strong, who had taken pride in carrying his own weight, but who now was quietly losing the fight to keep up. Renee slowed to a halt. Her eyes darted to the digital clock above the platform. 10 minutes. She could still make it. She'd trained too hard, sacrificed too much. If she moved now, she'd have just enough time to get through the final checkpoint and catch the Atella before the doors shut. But something in the way, his hand trembled. Something in the resignation of his eyes stopped her. It reminded her of her grandfather, who once collapsed in a grocery aisle while strangers pretended not to see. That memory had stayed with her for years. She could never forget the way people stepped over him, how her grandmother had to shout to get anyone to help. She sighed, adjusted her gym bag, and stepped off the path. "Sir," she said, gently placing a hand on his elbow, "can I help you with that?" He looked up, startled. His eyes were a soft, tired blue, the kind that had seen too many miles. I wouldn't want to trouble you, young lady." "It's no trouble," she said, crouching down to lift the suitcase. It was heavy, deceptively so. She leaned into it, using her legs, and swung it upright. "Where you headed?" "Platform 12, he said, his voice barely audible. "The 12:10 to New Haven. I think I've missed it." Renee glanced at the platform schedule. "You've still got 5 minutes." The man tried to smile, but it faltered. "I'm not as fast as I used to be." "Well," she said, shifting the bag to her shoulder, "lucky for you, I'm one of the fastest women in D.C. He chuckled softly. "That right?" "Renee Holloway," she said, offering her hand. "Walter Bain," he replied, shaking it with a grip that was gentle but firm. "Thank you." They moved slowly. Walter's steps were uneven, his breath shallow. Renee adjusted her stride to match his, shielding him from the sun as best she could. The heat radiated off the tracks, making her shirt stick to her skin. Her heart pounded, not from exertion, but from what she knew was slipping away with every step. Her train, her trial, her chance. As they neared Platform 12, she felt the tension tighten across her shoulders. The sound of the conductor's voice calling out final boarding echoed faintly in the distance, but she didn't stop. The platform stretched out ahead of them like a long hallway. Renee glanced back once toward her gate, then kept walking. Still, she walked on. She didn't know that a train was being held just a few tracks over, or that the man leaning on her arm was the architect of a nationwide railway empire. She just knew that someone needed her, and that was enough. They reached Platform 12 with just over a minute to spare. The train's doors stood open, the final boarding call echoing faintly over the PA system. Renee shifted Walter's suitcase onto the small ramp by the door and offered her arm once more as he stepped slowly aboard. The conductor gave her a curious glance, but said nothing. Walter nodded a quiet thanks to the man before turning to face Renee once more. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped," he said, voice rough with age and emotion. Renee gave a modest smile, wiping the back of her hand against her damp forehead. "You'd have managed," she said, "but I'm glad you didn't have to." Walter hesitated, reaching into the breast pocket of his jacket. "Please take this." It was a small folded card, clean and firm. Renee shook her head reflexively. "You don't need to give me anything. I missed my train, not the end of the world." But he pressed it into her hand with surprising steadiness. "Please, I insist. You might need this more than you think." She slipped it into the side pocket of her gym bag without looking, too tired and too hot to argue. "All right, take care of yourself, Mr. Bain." He nodded once. "You too, Miss Holloway. And thank you for seeing me." As the train doors closed, Renee stood alone on the platform, sweat dripping down her neck, her muscles aching not from training, but from tension. She sighed deeply and turned back toward the main concourse. The Richmond train was long gone. Her race, her chance at nationals, all of it slipping away, like water through cupped hands. She found a vending machine and bought a lukewarm bottle of water with her last crumpled $5 bill. There wouldn't be another race this year. She sat near a corner window in the waiting area, the plastic seat sticky and cracked. Her phone buzzed, a message from her coach. We waited, but they had to close the registration. I'm sorry, Renee. Next year. She blinked at the screen, letting the disappointment settle like dust on her skin. No tears. She'd trained herself not to cry over setbacks. You adapt, you adjust, you move. That's what her mama always said. Still, it felt like something permanent had shifted. Not just the missed train, but what it represented. One more door quietly closing. Trying to refocus, she reached into her gym bag, pulling out a protein bar and accidentally the folded card Walter had given her. Curious now, she opened it. Inside was a business card with embossed lettering that shimmered slightly under the station lights. Walter Bain, founder and CEO, Summit Rail Systems. She blinked, reread it twice. Summit Rail. Weren't they the ones behind the new high-speed rail project? She turned the card over. In careful script, it read, If you ever find yourself stuck, come find me. It didn't say how, no number, just the name, the logo, and those quiet, handwritten words. Her brows furrowed. Was this a joke, a courtesy? Or had she just helped someone far more important than she realized? Before she could gather her thoughts, a station employee approached her. A young man in a Summit Rail polo shirt, holding a tablet. Excuse me, ma'am, are you Renee Holloway? She stood quickly, startled. Yes. Is something wrong? He smiled. Not at all. Mr. Bain asked me to find you. He's requested your company aboard his private transport car. It's already on the platform. We'd be honored if you joined him. Renee stared, unsure how to process the words. His, private train car? The employee nodded. He'd like to speak with you. Please, this way. She followed, not quite believing what was happening. The hallway led her to a quiet, polished section of the station she hadn't noticed before. Past velvet ropes, down a short corridor lined with old railway photographs, and out onto a private boarding platform. There, gleaming beneath the late afternoon sun, was a sleek silver high-speed rail car with the Summit Rail logo etched near the door. A uniformed attendant opened the door and motioned her inside. The interior was unlike anything she had seen. Smooth leather seating in soft earth tones, glass panels with ambient lighting, and a faint scent of sandalwood and polished steel. Walter sat comfortably at a corner table, now changed into a more formal blazer, a tablet in front of him, and a glass of iced tea beside his hand. He looked up with a smile that warmed despite the elegance of his surroundings. Miss Holloway, he said, gesturing for her to sit. I hoped you'd come. Renee sat down slowly, still gripping the edge of her bag. You're the owner of this railway? Founder, he corrected gently, though these days I try not to throw that title around unless I have to. She chuckled nervously. I didn't expect any of this. I thought you were just someone's granddad on a hot day. Well, I am that too, he said, sipping his tea. But today, you gave up something important to help someone invisible. I noticed that. Not many people would have. She shrugged, the tension beginning to slip from her shoulders. I don't regret helping you. Just wish I could have done both. Walter nodded slowly. What if I told you this wasn't a lost opportunity, but a beginning. He reached into a folder on the table and pulled out a document. Summit Rail is building its first high-speed athlete sponsorship program, training, funding, and support for overlooked talent. Not the usual Olympic pipeline, but the underdog runners who work shifts and raise kids and grind in silence. We need a face for that program. Someone who's walked that path. Someone with fire and discipline. I think that's you. Renee blinked. I'm just an amateur runner. I don't have any titles. Yet, he said calmly. But I've read your bio, watched a few clips. Your coach sent them when I asked. You've got more grit than most people twice your rank. All you need is a platform and someone who sees you. She leaned back, heart thumping. This was surreal. Was this real? Walter smiled kindly. There's a media day next month in Chicago. We'll launch the campaign. You'll be front and center, with full training support, housing if needed, and a stipend, so you can train without burning out. Why me? She asked, still unsure. Because, he said simply, you made the kind of choice that tells me who you are. And I want this program to be built on more than speed. I want it to be built on character. The train began to hum beneath them, its engine coming to life. We're headed to Richmond, Walter added with a wink. Thought you might still want to see that track. Renee laughed, the sound part disbelief, part gratitude. She looked out the window, watching the skyline blur as the train pulled away from the station. She didn't know what waited at the end of this ride. But for the first time in a long while, she felt something like hope flicker back to life. The train surged forward with a quiet power, its motion so smooth that Renee hardly noticed they were moving until the landscape outside began to change. Fields and suburbs gave way to long stretches of countryside, then industrial edges of southern Virginia. The hum of the engine was a calming rhythm beneath their conversation, and Renee found herself speaking more freely than she expected. She told Walter about her job at the community center in Alexandria, how she ran classes for kids in between her own workouts, how her mother taught her to stretch every dollar without breaking her spirit. She shared stories of late-night training, of taking the city bus in pre-dawn darkness to make it to a track with floodlights, of fixing her own running shoes with duct tape and determination. Walter listened without interruption, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes intent, never once checking his tablet or his watch. When she finished, he said quietly, "That's exactly the kind of story people need to hear. We don't just want to support athletes. We want to redefine what a champion looks like." The words settled in Renee's chest like something solid and reassuring. She hadn't realized until that moment how much she'd been waiting. Starving, really, for someone to see more than just effort. For someone to name it as value. As they neared Richmond, a staff member appeared at the door with a light knock, informing them that local reporters had gathered at the station. "We gave them a heads up," Walter said, turning to her with a calm smile. "If you're willing, I'd like you to make your debut today, not with a race, but with your voice." Renee felt the familiar stir of nerves in her stomach, the kind that always rose before a competition. But beneath it was a steadiness, a sense of direction. She nodded. "I'll do it, but I want this to be real, not a publicity thing." Walter's smile deepened. "Exactly what I hoped you'd say." When the train pulled into Richmond's new high-speed terminal, the crowd was modest but attentive. Local journalists, a few Summit Rail executives, and curious travelers stood near a small podium set up just beyond the gates. Walter stepped out first, waving briefly, then motioned to Renee. She stepped down the polished stairs of the train car, the late afternoon sun warming her shoulders, the buzz of voices dimming as people noticed her. Some recognized her face from local races. Others didn't know her at all. But they listened as she stepped up to the mic, took a breath, and began to speak. "My name is Renee Holloway," she said. "I was supposed to be here earlier today to run a qualifying heat for nationals, but I didn't make it. I missed that train, literally, because I stopped to help someone who looked like they needed a hand." She glanced toward Walter, who stood to the side, arms crossed, watching her with pride that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Turns out that someone was the owner of Summit Rail. And because of that moment, I'm standing here now, not as someone who missed an opportunity, but as someone who was given another one. She went on to talk about the sponsorship program, about Walter's vision to support underrepresented athletes, and her role as its first ambassador. The applause that followed was real, not thunderous, not cinematic, but warm and grounded, like the first time someone calls you by your name and means it. Over the next few days, news outlets picked up the story. Headlines framed it as an act of kindness returned, a moment of fate. Renee didn't correct them, but she kept the folded card Walter gave her in her wallet as a reminder that the story hadn't started with a train. It had started with a choice. The following months moved quickly. She relocated to Chicago, where Summit Rail had its main offices and newly opened athlete development facility. There, she trained full-time, had access to nutritionists, physiotherapists, and top-tier coaches. But more importantly, she was asked to help design the program's culture, to help shape how future athletes would be mentored, not just trained. She brought in her old coach from Alexandria. She hosted weekend workshops for high school girls in underserved neighborhoods. She spoke at public schools and community centers about grit, purpose, and the power of seeing people, really seeing them. For the first time in her life, Renee wasn't just running towards something. She was pulling others with her. A year later, she stood at the starting line of the U.S. National Track and Field Trials in Eugene, Oregon. Her body felt stronger than ever, her mind sharper. The stadium was packed, the noise deafening. But in her chest, there was stillness. She had come here not just as a runner, but as a woman who had learned that sometimes you win before the race even starts. She placed third that day, earning a spot on the national team. Sponsors called. TV interviews followed. But through it all, she kept a quiet distance from the glitter. Her favorite moments were still the ones spent on a track with no cameras or at a school gymnasium, helping a nervous eighth grader find her rhythm. Then came the second call from Walter. "We're expanding," he said over the phone. "Atlanta, Dallas, Seattle. We want the program to grow, and we want you to lead the next center in LA full leadership. Budget control, curriculum. It's yours if you want it." Renee didn't answer right away. She looked around her small apartment in Chicago, the one Summit helped her afford. She glanced at her running shoes by the door, at the vision board above her desk where she'd written "Run with Purpose" in thick black letters. She thought of that day in the station, of the sweat, the heat, the ache of disappointment, and of the card in her wallet. She smiled slowly. "Let's do it," she said. "Let's give someone else their second chance." Back at Union Station, a plaque now hangs near Platform 12. It's small, brushed bronze, mounted beside an old bench scorched by summer sun. It reads, in honor of choices made not for reward, but because they were right. Let this be a place where kindness boards first. And sometimes passengers pause to read it, their eyes drifting toward the polished floors, toward memories or regrets or decisions not yet made. Maybe one day one of them will stop, just like Renee did. Maybe they'll choose to help someone instead of rushing past, and maybe, just maybe, they'll discover that missing a train isn't the end. Sometimes it's the start of the ride that matters most.